Welcome back to our series, Polish September 1939. In today's episode, Part 7, we are going to delve into a very somber but crucial topic: the human losses suffered by the Polish, German, and Soviet armies during the campaign. It's a complex subject, with figures that have been debated and revised over the decades. Our primary source for today's discussion will be the comprehensive work, Poland, 1939 to 1945. Human Losses and Victims of Repression Under Two Occupations, published by the Institute of National Remembrance. Let's start with the Polish forces. Immediately after the war, in January 1945, a body called the Polish War Reparations Bureau was established. In 1947, they released a statement on Poland's war losses. According to their figures for the 1939 campaign, the Polish army suffered 66,300 killed, 133,700 wounded, and a staggering 420,000 missing. One of the most significant re-evaluations was done by Professor Tadeusz Panecki. In 1995, his research presented a different picture. Panecki estimated the number of killed, those who died of wounds, and those who went missing without a trace to be much higher. The biggest discrepancy, however, lies in the number of prisoners of war. Panecki's research shows that 587,300 Polish soldiers ended up in German captivity. It's worth noting that German records actually claim a higher number, around 694,000 prisoners. Of those captured by the Germans, an estimated 10,000 died from their wounds after being taken prisoner. In the initial period after the fighting ceased, about 120,000 were released. Throughout October and November of 1939, more prisoners were let go, including Polish citizens of German descent. Additionally, 17,420 Ukrainian and Belarusian soldiers were handed over to the U.S. Tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners of war were also discharged. But tragically, most of them would later perish in concentration camps and ghettos. Finally, tens of thousands who were deemed unfit for work, sick, or injured were also released. After all these releases, around 420,000 Polish soldiers remained in German prisoner of war camps. Now, let's turn to the Soviet side. When the Red Army invaded from the east on September 17th, they also took a massive number of prisoners. Professor Panecki estimates that 452,500 Polish soldiers fell into Soviet captivity. Of this number, about 420,000 were held in various camps and forced labor facilities across the Soviet Union. Another prominent historian, Professor Shays Ogi Uksak, also conducted his own verification in his 1993 book, Poland and Poles in World War II. Comparing the findings of the War Reparations Bureau, Vuchak and Panecki, reveals some interesting differences, especially concerning the number of soldiers killed. So, why do later historians believe the initial number was an under? One compelling piece of evidence is the number of graves. In Polish cemeteries alone, there are 70,520 documented graves of soldiers from the 1939 campaign. On top of that, in the former eastern borderlands, there are at least 964 more. These numbers strongly support the higher estimates of killed in action. The number of soldiers killed by the Red Army specifically is another area of debate. Now, let's consider the total strength of the Polish army in September 1939. It mobilized approximately 950,000 soldiers. We've talked about the killed, wounded, and captured. But what happened to the rest? A significant number managed to escape captivity by crossing into neutral countries. An estimated 82,000 soldiers were interned in neighboring nations. The largest contingent, about 30,000, made it to Romania. Over 40,000 crossed into Hungary, and the remaining 12,000 found refuge in Lithuania, Latvia, and Slovakia. It's important to note that even these figures are debated. For instance, some research suggests the number of soldiers interned in Romania was closer to 25,000, and Romanian records from September 23, 1939, list only about 20,845 interned soldiers. Despite the discrepancies, it's clear that tens of thousands of Polish soldiers managed to evade capture, and many of them would go on to form the Polish armed forces in the West, Continuing the fight from abroad, here's an interesting statistical puzzle. If we add up the total number of soldiers taken captive by both Germany and the Soviet Union, that is 587,300 by the Germans and 452,500 by the Soviets, we get a total of 1,039,800 prisoners. But wait, we just said the entire Polish army was about 950,000 strong. How can the number of prisoners be higher than the total number of soldiers? The answer lies in how the statistics were compiled. The aggressors didn't just count military personnel. They also included members of the state police, border guards, clerks, and other uniformed civil servants in their prisoner of war statistics, which inflates the final count beyond the actual size of the mobilized army. This detail is crucial for understanding the true scale of the human cost and the scope of the repression that followed. The September campaign wasn't just a defeat of an army. It was the capture of a significant portion of the Polish state's infrastructure and its people. Thank you for joining us for this detailed look into the human losses of the 1939 campaign. The numbers are not just statistics. They represent individual lives, families torn apart, and a nation's struggle for survival. Join us next time as we continue to explore the complex history. We're diving deep into a topic that has sparked debate among historians for decades: the true number of German casualties during the 1939 invasion of Poland. You might think the numbers are straightforward, but as we'll see, the truth is often hidden in the details. So, let's start with the official German figures. The most commonly cited source is General Burkhard Müller. Hillebrandt's work, Das Heer 1933 a 1945, he puts the numbers at 16,343 killed, 30,322 wounded, and 320 missing in action for the German army. These numbers became the standard reference for many years. But here's where it gets interesting. Are these figures a complete picture? Not kit. To get a clearer view, we have to dig into the German archives ourselves. Specifically, a document from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or the High Command of the Armed Forces, dated early October 1939, tis document, compiled just after the campaign, presents a slightly different story. It lists the Army's losses as 13,111 killed and missing, and 27,278 wounded. Notice that the killed and missing are combined here, a common practice at the time which can complicate direct comparisons. Now, let's add another layer. What about the Air Force and the Navy? The Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine also took losses. According to German sources, the Luftwaffe lost 229 killed and 279 missing, totaling 508 personnel. The Kriegsmarine reported 76 killed and 111 missing, for a total of 187. If we add these to the Army's numbers from that early report, the total German military losses come to 13,806 killed and missing, and a little over 27,000 wounded. So, where did Müller Hillebrandt get his higher numbers from? His data, published years after the war, likely includes soldiers who later died from their wounds. This is a crucial distinction. The initial reports from 1939 only counted those confirmed dead or missing during the campaign itself. Later figures often get revised upwards as wounded soldiers succumb to their injuries in hospitals, sometimes weeks or even months later. This is a common pattern in casualty accounting for all armies. Let's look at another intriguing source from the German military archives. A report titled Zusammenstellung der Verluste from December 1939 gives us even more detailed numbers. For the army, it states 8,082 killed, 27,278 wounded, 5,029 missing, and 695 who died of wounds after the initial reports. If we combine the killed, missing, and those who died of wounds, we get 13,806. That number should sound familiar. It perfectly matches the combined killed and missing figure from the earlier OKW report. This suggests that the initial missing count was quite high, and many were later confirmed as killed. This brings us to a total of around 14,000 German soldiers killed or missing across all branches. But here's the twist. A later verification process, which involved cross-referencing names from war journals, raised the number of confirmed killed to 16,608. This higher number, very close to Müller-Hillebrandt's figure, is what you'll often find on sources like Wikipedia and Wikipedia. They typically cite around 16,000 to 17,000 killed. The discrepancy between the initial 1939 reports and these later, verified totals highlights the immense difficulty of tracking every single soldier in the fog of war. Now, let's turn our attention to the Polish perspective. How do Polish historians view these numbers? Unsurprisingly, their estimates have often been higher. For many years after the war, Polish sources frequently claimed German losses were as high as 90,000 killed and wounded. This figure served a propaganda purpose, emphasizing the fierce resistance of the Polish army. However, modern Polish scholarship has moved towards more nuanced and evidence-based conclusions. Let's take a look at the work of renowned historians. The celebrated British historian Norman Davies, in his monumental work, God's Playground, A History of Poland, largely aligns with the revised German figures. Another key voice is the prominent Polish military historian Leszek Musz. In his book Wojna Polska in 1939, he conducted a very thorough analysis. Mikulski argues that the German high command deliberately underreported their losses for propaganda reasons, to portray the invasion as a swift and relatively bloodless victory. So, what can we conclude from all this? The most credible and widely accepted figure for German soldiers killed during the Polish campaign is around 16,000 to 17,000, with about 30,000 wounded. This is based on meticulously verified German records compiled after the immediate chaos of the campaign had subsided. While initial reports were lower and some Polish estimates were higher, the archival evidence points consistently to this range. It shows that while the campaign was a strategic victory for Germany, it was far from a walk in the park. The Polish army, despite being outmatched in technology and numbers, inflicted significant casualties on the invader. The fierce battles of the Bizera River, the defense of Warsaw, and the stand of the Hel Peninsula all took a heavy toll. The story of these numbers isn't just about statistics. It's about honoring the historical truth. It reminds us of the true cost of the invasion and the tenacity of the Polish defense in September 19. Numbers tell a story of a nation fighting desperately for its freedom against overwhelming odds. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into a complex piece of history. Welcome back to our series on the Polish September campaign of 1939. In this final part, we move beyond the maps and military strategies to confront the true costs of the conflict, the human losses, and the enduring meaning of that fateful month. The September campaign was a catastrophe in human terms for Poland, Germany, and the Soviet Union. The toll was immense. These weren't just abstract statistics. They were lives cut short, families torn apart, and futures destroyed. The Polish armed forces, fighting a desperate battle against two invading powers, suffered devastating casualties. The German military, despite its rapid advance, also paid a heavy price in blood on the fields and in the cities of Poland. And then, on September 17th, the Soviet Union's invasion from the east opened a second front, compounding the destruction and adding to the casualty lists. Accurately counting the Soviet losses has been a complex historical task. Polish historians, like Professor Chase or Gorzelak, have estimated Soviet casualties to be around 2,500 to 3,000 killed, and between 8,000 and 10,000 wounded. These figures are based on extensive research into the campaign. However, studies from Russian archives, such as those compiled by GIA, offer a more detailed and lower official count. According to these records, the Soviet Union's irrecoverable losses totaled 1,475 soldiers. This breaks down into 973 killed in action, 102 who died from their wounds, 302 listed as missing, 76 who died in non-combat incidents, and another 22 from disease. Additionally, these archives record 2,002 wounded and 381 who fell ill. This gives us an official total of 3,858 Soviet casualties. The difference between these figures highlights the challenges of historical accounting, especially in the chaos of war. Different methodologies and access to different sources can lead to varying conclusions. But regardless of which number is more accurate, they all point to the same grim reality. Thousands of individuals on all sides perished. Behind every number is a human story, a personal tragedy that rippled through families and communities. But to truly understand September 1939, we must look beyond the numbers. The campaign ended in a military defeat for Poland, but it was far from a moral collapse. This is the crucial point. The Polish state did not surrender. It did not cease to exist. While the government was forced into exile, it continued to function, recognized by the Allies as the legitimate authority of the Polish nation. Its armed forces did not lay down their arms for good. They regrouped and continued to fight alongside the Allies on every front of the Second World War. And within Poland itself, under the brutal dual occupation of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, resistance began almost immediately. The spirit of the nation was not broken. The Polish underground state, a unique and clandestine phenomenon, was born from the ashes of defeat. It was a testament to a society that refused to be conquered. Polish soldiers fought with incredible bravery against overwhelming odds, often fully aware that their stand was hopeless in a purely military sense. Civilians faced occupation, mass arrests, deportations, and terror. Yet they held on to their culture, their language, and their identity. A nation attacked from two directions, erased from the map of Europe, did not simply vanish. It adapted, it survived, and it resisted. September 1939 was not a demonstration of Polish weakness. On the contrary, it was a profound demonstration of resolve. It revealed the courage of a people facing total destruction, the resilience of a nation stripped of its sovereign territory, and the unyielding determination to regain independence, even if it meant fighting from the underground and from abroad. The story of the September campaign is therefore not just a story of loss and defeat. It is a story of national strength, of moral courage, and of an unbroken will to be free. The spirit forged in the fires of September 1939 would define Poland's struggle for the next 5 years of war and for decades to come under post-war oppression. It is a legacy of defiance that continues to resonate to this day. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at the Polish September campaign. If you found this series valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more historical content. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Thanks for watching.